In the long stretch of human history, power did not belong to the loudest voice, nor did it rest with those who were kind for the sake of approval. Power flowed toward clarity, toward those who understood human nature without sentimentality, and toward those who refused to deny the darker contours of the human mind. Niccolo Machiavelli is a name that many interpret through caricature, manipulation, cruelty, and deception. But beneath the surface of popular misunderstanding lies something far more subtle, something rooted in psychological realism, emotional discipline, and an unfiltered view of how people behave when power, security, and ambition are at stake. Machiavelli did not teach people to become villains. He asked people to remove illusion. He asked them to see the world, not as they wish it to be, but as it is. In psychology, the refusal to acknowledge uncomfortable truths is known as avoidance coping. It protects emotional comfort, but it weakens long-term outcomes. Human beings often silence themselves to maintain harmony. They shrink their needs to avoid conflict. They apologize for boundaries because they fear rejection more than self-betrayal. And through that softness, life narrows. Machiavelli challenges that softness. He invites a different posture, not loud aggression, but quiet firmness. Not chaos, but strategy, not cruelty, but a refusal to abandon self-preservation in a world where loyalty shifts, motives blur, and kindness is often interpreted as permission. To be ruthless, in Machiavelli's original framing, is not to harm others senselessly. It is to cut away what threatens your stability. In psychological language, ruthlessness can mean boundary enforcement, detachment from unreliable actors, and the emotional maturity to tolerate disapproval. It is the ability to say no without apology. It is the discipline to accept that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. It is the courage to recognize manipulation and the self-respect to withdraw rather than negotiate. Many people never reach their potential, not because they lack intelligence or talent or opportunity, but because they lack this psychological resilience. They allow others to drain their attention. They prioritize pleasing over purpose. They confuse compassion with compliance, and they confuse harmony with safety. They forget that a soft heart still requires a hard framework. Machiavelli invites an uncomfortable awareness. Outcomes matter more than intention, and self-protection is not immoral, but necessary. If you do not guard your psychological space, others will occupy it. If you do not direct your future, someone else will script it. And if you do not recognize the silent economics of power, you will pay the price for another person's ambition. Tonight we slow down and study Machiavelli, not as a guide for domination, but as a mirror for emotional strength. We explore why a degree of ruthlessness is not a flaw, but a safeguard, not a corruption of character, but an evolution of self-preservation. This is Machiavelli's cold truth, and it is gentler and wiser than most people think. Point 1. Ruthlessness means accepting human nature. For Machiavelli, power rested on one simple foundation. Human beings are motivated by need, fear, self-interest, advantage, and emotional incentives. He did not label people evil. He labeled them predictable. In psychology, this aligns with evolutionary behavioral models. Individuals conserve energy, protect resources, and gravitate toward conditions that benefit them. Loyalty is fragile because incentives shift. Kindness is conditional because internal priorities shift. A person who ignores this will suffer, not because the world is malicious, but because the world is structured around self-preservation. When Machiavelli asks you to be ruthless, He asks you to remove naive expectations. Psychology calls this cognitive decentering, seeing behavior without personalizing it. If a colleague protects themselves, that is not betrayal, it is a pattern. If a friend withdraws once their emotional needs are met, that is not cruelty. It is reciprocity. Understanding this prevents shock, resentment, and emotional dysregulation. Many people live in a state of repeated disappointment because they project their values onto others, assuming harmony where there is only negotiation. Ruthlessness dissolves that illusion. It does not demand suspicion, it demands observation. The psychologically grounded individual accepts that a person may compliment them today and undermine them tomorrow. Not due to malice, but due to shifting personal stakes. When you internalize this, relationships become calmer, expectations shrink, clarity widens. You no longer feel injured by predictable human variance. You simply adjust. This is not cynicism, it is adaptive cognition. To Machiavelli, ruthlessness is not aggression, nor is it cruelty. It is the disciplined refusal to build emotional security on unstable variables. If you understand that people are guided by incentives, then you stop offering loyalty where there is no alignment. You stop offering trust where there is no consistency. In psychological terms, this resembles boundary formation, an internal recognition that emotional resources must be protected from unreliable feedback loops. Being ruthless means treating social outcomes like natural outcomes. Rain falls, tides recede, and individuals shift according to reward. Once that lens is adopted, the emotional nervous system relaxes. You stop reacting to every fluctuation in human behavior. You stop assigning moral weight to strategic decisions. You stop confusing proximity with devotion. Machiavelli wasn't asking anyone to harden their hearts. He was asking them to recalibrate their expectations. When compassion is combined with clarity, emotional intelligence expands. You can be kind without being blind. You can be generous without assuming permanence. And you can love without assuming immunity from risk. That balance, firm perception, soft emotion, is the true definition of mature ruthlessness. Point 2, compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Machiavelli wrote that a leader who attempts to be universally generous will destroy their state. In emotional psychology, a person who attempts to be universally understanding will destroy their stability. Compassion, when unbounded, mutates into self-cancellation. When you remove all friction, all requirements, and all consequences, you do not create harmony. You create behavioral inflation. A child who never encounters a boundary does not develop emotional regulation. A parent who never disciplines creates a behavioral economy of entitlement, in which the young mind learns that desire is equivalent to entitlement and attention is guaranteed, regardless of conduct. In adulthood, that same pattern converts into interpersonal fragility, the inability to tolerate frustration, delay, or denial. The same mechanism applies to relationships. A partner who accommodates every emotional impulse trains their counterpart to disregard consequences. By repeatedly absorbing volatility, they do not heal the relationship. They subsidize dysfunction. Emotional reinforcement follows the same logic as behavioral reinforcement. Whatever is rewarded repeats. A manager who avoids correction produces workplace entropy. In behavioral science, reinforcement drives repetition, and systems decay when deviation is cost-free. Machiavelli's ruthlessness is the willingness to impose limits early, not to punish, but to structure outcomes. In psychological terms, boundaries create cognitive predictability. They teach the nervous system how far it can go. When someone violates your boundary and you respond with silence, the nervous system remembers you as safe to disrespect. That learning becomes encoded through repetition, forming what neuroscience calls associative memory. When someone repeatedly demands emotional labor and you comply without negotiation, your identity becomes interchangeable with service. You cease to exist as a differentiated individual and become a resource, emotionally extractable, psychologically replaceable. A person becomes useful, not valued. The ruthless posture says, my empathy is selective, my emotional bandwidth is rationed, my time is finite. This is not harshness, it is stewardship. Time, energy, and attention are metabolic resources. The brain consumes energy through emotional regulation. If you constantly absorb other people's chaos, you overload your stress mechanisms, what psychology names allostatic load, the cumulative biological strain produced by chronic stress exposure. High allostatic load correlates with burnout, emotional blunting, sleep disruption, and impaired decision-making. Eventually, the mind collapses from quiet, cumulative depletion. Ruthlessness is preventive care. It is not the abandonment of kindness, but the calibration of it. It is the acceptance that compassion without proportion becomes exploitation, and that stability requires selective allowance, measured access, and the courage to let others experience the cost of their own behavior. Point 3. Reputation is a psychological instrument. Machiavelli taught that perception precedes function. People believe capability based on visible signals. Modern research confirms this through the halo effect. Thin slice judgment, impression heuristics, and dominance displays. When you speak softly but decisively, the mind interprets authority. When you maintain eye contact without aggression, the mind reads confidence. When you refrain from excessive justification, the mind reads certainty. Manipulators exploit perception, but so do strong individuals through restraint. There is nothing harmful about managing how others read you. It is cognitive ecology. You shape your environmental feedback. If you appear uncertain, people test limits. If you present availability without criteria, people consume presence. If you appear apologetic for existing, people subconsciously assign a lower rank. Machiavelli's ruthlessness is emotional neutrality. You do not broadcast insecurity. You do not confess fears impulsively. You do not advertise uncertainty to those who may weaponize it. That is not secrecy. It is emotional risk management. A reputation is not ego. It is a psychological shield that reduces unnecessary conflict. When others perceive you as stable, firm, and self-guarded, harmful actors self-select out. This saves energy. Point 4. Do not explain more than necessary. Excessive explanation is a subtle trauma response. People explain too much when they fear rejection, when they fear displeasing authority, when they fear being misinterpreted, when they internalize guilt. Machiavelli recommends the opposite approach, not opacity, but intentional simplicity. Say less, reveal less, justify less. In cognitive psychology, the over-explanatory habit stems from approval conditioning. A nervous system shaped by inconsistent validation learns to protect itself through persuasion. But persuasion exhausts. It also communicates need. Machiavelli's ruthless advice is emotional fasting. Reduce disclosure. Protect private motives. Do not hand others the script of your vulnerabilities. Interpret silence not as secrecy, but as autonomy. If someone demands excessive explanation, consider the motive. People demand clarity only when they suspect negotiation is possible. Ruthlessness means reducing negotiable surfaces. A firm, no-lax narrative. It is self-contained. When individuals understand that your decisions are not susceptible to emotional pressure, their strategies change. Communication becomes efficient. Conflict diminishes. The self grows quieter, calmer. Point 5, do not expect gratitude. Human beings normalize benefits quickly, and psychology names this hedonic adaptation. The mind absorbs comfort as the new baseline. What once felt like a gift quietly becomes standard operating expectation. A favor becomes an obligation, and assistance transforms into an unspoken demand for continued support. Machiavelli understood a cold truth long before modern psychology mapped the cognitive mechanisms behind it. The people you help may eventually resent you once they no longer need your help. Their resentment does not arise from cruelty. It arises from a subtle form of internal shame. Dependence forces an individual to acknowledge a hierarchy, and most egos revolt against hierarchy. When someone stabilizes emotionally, financially, or socially, they rewrite the past to protect their self-esteem. They minimize the role of external support or reinterpret help as a mutual exchange rather than a lifeline. This protects their internal narrative. I succeeded because of me. If you expect gratitude, you inadvertently create emotional debt, and that debt breeds discomfort, denial, and in many cases, hostility. The mind seeks equilibrium, not indebtedness. When someone feels that they owe you something undefined, they may psychologically free themselves by diminishing you. This is why Machiavelli warns against expecting thankfulness. Expectations attach you to outcomes you do not control, and attachment generates emotional pain. Ruthlessness in this context is emotional self-regulation. It does not mean malice or cruelty, it means clarity. Ruthlessness stabilizes emotion by removing the fragile assumption that the world will repay fairness with fairness. It means giving only what you can release fully from your psychological balance sheet. It means helping others only when acknowledgement is irrelevant. It means refusing to convert kindness into a future bargaining chip. In psychological resilience, reward must be intrinsic, not dependent on relational echo. When someone forgets your generosity, you remain undisturbed because your action was a decision, not an emotional investment scheme. You offered help because it aligned with your values, not because it purchased loyalty. The ruthless mind does not chase reciprocity. It recognizes that reciprocity is unpredictable, delayed, or non-existent. It recognizes that emotional ledgers make relationships brittle. It recognizes that attachment is often self-wounding. Instead, it practices a detached form of contribution. When you give, you are complete. When you assist, you disengage. When you support, you release the outcome. This creates psychological sovereignty. No resentment forms, no bitterness accumulates. You retain clarity, autonomy, and inner peace because your giving is not transactional. By abandoning the expectation of return, you free others from the burden of repayment and free yourself from the emotional volatility of disappointment. In a world where memory is selective and self-esteem is defensive, emotional ruthlessness becomes a strategy for sanity. Point 6, decide rather than hesitate. Indecision is cognitive strain, a form of internal friction that subtly depletes psychological resources. The brain is wired to interpret uncertainty as a threat, because unresolved outcomes signal a loss of control. The amygdala activates, vigilance rises, and the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive planning, begins to falter under the load. Rumination increases cortisol output, bathing the nervous system in stress hormones designed for physical danger rather than internal debate. The longer one remains suspended in uncertainty, the more the body behaves as though it must brace for impact. Excessive evaluation, while often disguised as diligence or caution, reduces action momentum. The mind becomes a looping mechanism, rehearsing possibilities, predicting consequences, constructing variables, but never translating cognition into behavior. Over time, this loop fosters paralysis rather than preparation. Machiavelli admired decisiveness, not because rapid action overwhelms opponents, but because delayed action erodes stability from within. In political and psychological terms, hesitation is an invitation to interference. When an individual pauses too long, they create a void, and nature abhors psychological vacuums. Into that empty space, external influence enters. Opinions, pressures, manipulations, doubts. Others begin to shape the trajectory that one failed to claim. The ruthless posture in this context is not cruelty but internal direction. Choose, act, adjust. It is an allegiance to agency rather than an emotional performance. In modern clinical psychology, this mechanism carries a name: behavioral activation. It is one of the most studied and effective interventions for depression. Movement prevents depressive spirals because behavior precedes emotional clarity. When you act, you gather data from the real environment. Your nervous system receives feedback, and the cognitive map updates. When you delay, you gather fear, projecting outcomes, reinforcing catastrophizing, and making imagined consequences feel disproportionately real. The mind becomes a storyteller without correction from lived evidence. Ruthlessness, therefore, is not speed, it is commitment to a chosen direction. A decision may not be perfect, but it ends circular stress. The moment choice is made, the prefrontal cortex can shift from prediction to execution. The ambiguity collapses and the nervous system stops bracing for the unknown. You accept responsibility for outcomes, which quietly restores authority to the self. The ego relaxes because motion replaces fantasy, and measurable experience replaces hypothetical threat. Action shrinks anxiety because the mind can finally differentiate between what is happening and what is merely feared. This is the paradox that Machiavelli observed centuries ago and that psychology now quantifies. Movement regulates emotion, commitment regulates identity, and decisiveness, expressed gently or ruthlessly, extracts the psyche from its own self-manufactured uncertainty. Point 7. Distance yourself from those who drain stability. For Machiavelli, alliances were utilitarian. For psychology, relationships are energy ecosystems. Every nervous system co-regulates with surrounding nervous systems. If a person constantly catastrophizes, their cortisol rises. If a person never takes responsibility, your emotional bandwidth depletes. If a person competes with your growth, your motivation collapses. Ruthlessness means emotional filtration. You are not obligated to remain accessible to those who destabilize you. Gain does not equal goodness. Familiarity does not equal compatibility. Kindness does not equal permanence. In neuroscience, mirror neurons absorb emotional climate. If someone lives in chronic panic, they internalize agitation. If someone weaponizes guilt, you internalize inhibition. Distance is not cruelty. Distance is neurological hygiene. Machiavelli understood that survival requires selective proximity. Modern psychology agrees life outcomes correlate strongly with emotional environment. Remove chaos and cognition improves. Remove hostility and creativity expands. Remove emotional takers and self-worth heals. And so ruthlessness is redefined. Not violence, not domination, not coldness. It is the refusal to abandon internal sovereignty. It is the quiet maintenance of emotional boundaries. It is the mature acceptance that not all people operate from the same moral code, and that expecting alignment creates unnecessary suffering. Ruthlessness is the soft skill of clarity. Clarity around human motives, clarity around your personal limits, clarity around emotional labor, and clarity around distance. It is not the destruction of empathy, it is the scaffolding that allows empathy to exist without self-erasure. It is kindness protected by structure. It is generosity supported by discernment. It is identity preserved by boundary. In the end, Machiavelli's cold truth becomes psychologically warm. You must protect yourself so that your inner life remains spacious enough to care, safe enough to think, and stable enough to grow.